Who do you think you owe your living to? My son splashed the beer he was holding over my head, and as I stood there drenched, he spat out those words without a care. Rubbing my beer-stung eyes and shivering from the cold, I looked up at my son. His anger only intensified, showing no sign of concern for me. I've had enough. Clutching my hands tightly, I glared back at my son. My name is Nancy. I'm about to turn 60. I raised our son Michael with my husband Joey, who is 5 years older than me. But Michael left home as soon as he graduated from college. Joey and I were enjoying our life as a couple, but in recent years, Joey started having chest pains and went for medical tests. The local hospital in our countryside said they couldn't handle it and referred us to a larger hospital nearby. After seeing specialists there, it was decided that Joey needed to be treated at an even larger university hospital in the city. The doctors there said regular visits would be necessary for his treatment, and hospitalization might be needed depending on his condition. I worried because just getting to the university hospital required a 2-hour flight. The costs for the visits alone were significant, and we needed to go every 2 weeks. The financial burden was huge. We considered moving, but city rent and living expenses were high. However, calculating the transportation costs of frequent visits, we concluded that moving would be cheaper in the long run. So we moved to a small apartment close to the university hospital. Life in the new place was tough. Even with our savings, the city rent was high. Joey, who had been working until then, was advised to rest, leaving me as the sole breadwinner. Finding a job was not easy at my age, but I managed to get a cashier's job at a supermarket and started supporting our household. One day, on our way back from a hospital visit, "Mom? Dad?" We heard a voice from behind and turned to see Michael, whom we hadn't seen in over 10 years. We had always lived a modest and peaceful life, but Michael had long been dissatisfied with it. When he got a job in a big city company, he said, "I'm finally getting out of here. I won't end up in this suffocating countryside, cutting ties with these poor folks. I'm never coming back, haha." And with those words of farewell, he left home and we lost contact with him. So it was a surprise to run into him after all these years. As I was at a loss for words, Joey suggested we go for a meal since it was lunchtime and we were all hungry. We went to a nearby family restaurant for the first time in a long while. While eating, we told Michael about our recent life. "Please let me live with you," he said. We were shocked by the sudden request, but then Michael explained. He had had frequent conflicts with his boss at work, and after a recent altercation, he quit his prestigious job on the spur of the moment and was now looking for a new one. He ran into us by chance and asked to stay. Seeing Michael struggling and asking for help, we decided to let him stay, on the condition that he pays half of the rent and utilities. At the end of the month, after taking Joey to his regular checkup, I returned home to find Michael just back from job hunting. "Michael, the rent and utilities are due soon. Can you give me your share for this month?" But he didn't respond. Thinking he didn't hear me, I asked again, only to be told he had no money, and wanted to skip this month's payment. Since we were also struggling financially, I insisted on the agreement. "That's so annoying." And Michael, annoyed, threw $50 at me and muttered under his breath. I couldn't help but be surprised at the act of throwing money at someone when they didn't have enough money, but Michael persisted in a voice that was barely audible. "Annoying," and "poor people," frightened but determined. I asked him about the shortfall, to which he shouted, "Greedy, I'll pay the rest later," and stormed out of the house. As expected, that month Michael only paid the $50 he had initially thrown. This was far from our initial agreement, and we were already not living comfortably, so our financial situation became quite strained. But in the following months, the same pattern continued. Michael would refuse to pay, claiming he had no money, and occasionally threw a few dollars at us whimsically. Despite not paying rent or utilities, he ate more than anyone, stayed up late using electricity, and took longer showers than anyone else. Living with him more than doubled our living expenses. We reached our limit and tried to kick him out for not keeping his promise. But whenever we tried, he would kick furniture, mimic punching, and just become uncontrollable. Michael was big, and neither Joey nor I could restrain him. Once he got angry and violent, he would stay in a bad mood for a while, easily set off again by the smallest things. When we locked him out while he was gone, he would bang on the door, yell loudly, and even call the police, claiming his family locked him out, leaving me apologizing profusely to the officers who arrived. Living with this unpredictable ticking time bomb was hard, but he's our son, and we decided to try and set him straight. With the increased expenses due to Michael, I had to increase my part-time work hours. 3 months later, Joey's health improved significantly. We gradually reduced his hospital visits from 2 to 3 times a week to once every 6 months. On the way back from the clinic, Joey and I held hands, happy to have overcome this phase. We couldn't afford a fancy dinner at an upscale restaurant, so we decided to celebrate modestly at home. But to avoid Michael eating it, we planned a slightly extravagant lunch instead. We stopped at the supermarket and splurged a little on some expensive meat, thinking it's a celebration after all. Michael had gone out for a job interview and wouldn't be back until evening. While Joey took a bath, I carefully cooked the steak. Just as the delicious aroma of the well-cooked steak filled the air, the entrance door suddenly opened. Michael had returned unexpectedly. Before I could say anything, Michael said, "Nice meat," and took both plates of steak. "I'm sorry, that's not yours," I shouted, but he ignored me. He easily brushed me aside when I tried to stop him and took the steak to the kitchen. Opening a beer, he started drinking, and eating the steak we had prepared for our celebration without a word of thanks. "Enough is enough. You haven't paid this month's food expenses, let alone the back rent and utilities. That's for Dad's celebration. I can't forgive this, even if you're my son." I finally lost my patience and shouted. Michael sighed deeply, holding the newly opened beer bottle, and began walking towards me with big strides. Expecting a punch, I raised my arms and closed my eyes, only to feel my head getting wet. Instead of hitting me, Michael had poured the beer over my head. "Who do you think is taking care of you? I'm the one looking after Dad during the day so you can work, right? I'm the one helping him shower. I'm working plenty, and yet you say it's not enough? You mean if I don't pay, I'm not contributing?" He yelled, arguing how much he had been helping us. As I opened my mouth to argue back, he smashed the empty beer bottle on the floor. The sound startling me, and he continued to yell without pause. "Money, money, money. All you think about is money, even though I'm taking care of you. I can't handle a greedy woman like that anymore, so just leave. You're unhappy because I'm not bringing in enough money, right? Then just go." Hearing the sound of a bottle breaking, Joey rushes in, but upon assessing the situation, he stares directly at Michael with a stern look. I let out a deep sigh and fixed my gaze on Michael. Even though he's my son, I can't take it anymore. "I understand. I'll leave by this weekend." At these words, Joey looked shocked and then hung his head deeply. Michael said, "You're staying another week?" he says in a troubled manner. He sounded annoyed and let out an exaggerated sigh before leaving the room without cleaning up, his footsteps echoing. I began cleaning up the broken beer bottle pieces, the wet clothes, and the floor. Joey joined in to help after a while. I couldn't help but sigh deeply, wondering how my son turned out this way. A week later, we were ready to leave the house. Having packed our belongings, the large items were already shipped, leaving only the small things. After Joey left the house first, I looked at Michael. He scoffed and shooed me away with his hand like I was an insect. "Get out of here, you greedy old woman. You don't appreciate a son who cares for you, treating me like a bastard just because I don't bring in money. You're no mother to me." That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Did you ever actually take care of Dad? Michael's face turned red with anger as soon as he heard my words. Normally, I would avoid provoking him, but knowing today was the last day, I felt the need to vent some frustration. "You're taking care of Dad at home so I can work, right? But all you do is watch TV in the living room while I'm out. You even make Dad prepare your lunch. And what about showers? Don't tell me you're calling it caregiving when you just put Dad in the shower and play mobile games in the changing room." That's right, Michael claims to be caregiving, but in reality, he does nothing. It's baffling how he can say that with such confidence, given his indifference towards Joey. Michael yells in response to my words, but it's all vague. He never specifies what he actually does. I am taking care of him, or thanks to who? I won't say exactly what I did. Of course, it's Joey and me who prepare the meals. Clean, shop, and take out the trash. The most Michael does is empty the fridge. You're the one who asked to move in, promising to pay utilities and rent. But you didn't keep your promise, bragging about caregiving without doing anything. I tried to kick you out multiple times, but you always got violent, making it impossible to handle you. But this ends today. You need to decide what to do by the end of next month. After that, you're on your own. I can't take care of you anymore. I said this to Michael, explaining his future options, and closed the entrance door in front of him, who looked ready to lash out. In the end, Michael didn't follow me. That night, I received a high-handed message from him asking if I had forgotten all the care I'd given him, and saying he would forgive me now if I apologized. Ignoring it led to another message the next morning, calling us deadbeat bastards who abandoned their son. That was it. A month later, I got a flood of calls and messages from Michael. I didn't notice them during work, and they numbered in the hundreds. I was stunned, but decided to answer when he called again. Finally picked up, huh? What's this about not being able to stay in the house anymore? Michael was frantic, repeating he couldn't stay in the house. It's obvious, isn't it? We had a 3-month rolling contract for that house. I told you several times before I left that we weren't renewing it, so you can't stay there anymore. It seems Michael had planned to take over the house and enjoy living alone, but the house was always on a 3-month contract. We rented it temporarily for Joey's medical appointments, and since his condition improved and he needed fewer visits, we ended the contract. It would be unavailable at the end of next month. I repeatedly explained that if Michael wanted to continue living there, he needed to make his own contract. I didn't know that, you tricked me. Don't be silly, I explained several times and left the necessary paperwork for contract change. Anyway, if you want to stay, you need to make your own contract. Otherwise, you need to leave soon to avoid bothering the management company. I said this and ended the call while Michael was still ranting. Despite him being my son, it pained me to see things turn out this way. He was smart enough to get into a big company, so why did he behave like a tantrum-throwing child? 3 days later, I received a message that Michael had left the apartment without renewing the lease. Michael, who had not been job hunting as he claimed, had squandered the salary he saved from his previous job and couldn't afford rent, so he had no choice but to leave. Seeing a message that he was returning home, I panicked and called him. What? You sold the house? It's my childhood home. How could you do that without telling me? That house was too big for just the two of us. You hadn't been in touch for over 10 years since you left, so I couldn't inform you about selling it. We built a large house during better economic times, thinking of Michael and eventually grandchildren. But Michael left and never contacted us again. Likely never to return. So I decided to sell it to a family who needed it more. You should have told me when we were living together. Hey, give me the money from the sale. That's the house I would have inherited after you died, so I have a right to that money, right? Michael's absurd demands only added to my headache. Even if you say it's your inheritance, the house originally belonged to Joey, and now it belongs to another family. We have no intention of leaving anything for you anymore, so we haven't given you our new address and don't plan to. We're cutting ties with you. I could hear Michael speechless and then shouting in anger, but I hung up without a care. Rubbing my aching forehead, I let out a deep sigh. Soon after, Michael was arrested. Despite all the explanations, Michael had gone to the location of our former home and confronted the family living there, demanding, "This is my house! Get out right now!" He seemed to have yelled. I had warned the family about Michael, so they were prepared. They had secured their home and called the police as soon as he tried to force his way in. Michael insisted to the arriving officers that it was his house, and when they tried to calm him down, he got angry and struck one of them, breaking into someone's house, smashing windows, and assaulting a police officer. Naturally, Michael was arrested for several crimes. We brought apology gifts to the family and neighbors, apologizing and asking them to keep our new address confidential. We used the money from the house sale and now live in a small rented house in an unknown location to Michael. It's close to the hospital, with a large park and walking paths, perfect for walks. We plan to live peacefully and mind our health from now on.